started? You can't hear? Let me pull it closer. Is that better? Can y'all hear me now? No? I'm scared to push some buttons. I don't want to just push any buttons. Nothing. Okay. No. Don't know where she went. The red light is on. I was expecting it to be green. There she is. Everybody is saying that they cannot hear me. I didn't push any buttons, except one. Okay, is that better? No? It's on? I can talk really loud. I've never been accused of being a wallflower. Right? If you look, stop laughing. All right, Sam, come on. So I'm Jerry Daniels, and thank you very much for coming tonight with everything going on and coming out to Livingston Parish. I was a longtime resident of the parish, so I'm very happy to be here with this project to help try to do some planning to help make the parish better. The LP has a special place in my heart, so I'm glad to be here. I work for a consulting firm partnered with Sam Crampton, and he is our project manager and lead engineer on this project. We have a large team of people. Anybody you see with a name tag on like this is part of the consulting team that have helped to pull this meeting. We're having a series of meetings throughout the watershed together. Feel free to approach any one of us and ask us any question that you might have. We're here to answer all of those questions for you tonight. So again, thank you very, very much for coming tonight and taking your time out, especially with everything going on. So what we're going to do tonight is we have a short presentation that we're going to walk through, and then we've got a couple of stations. Some of you have been kind of looking at the boards around the room to kind of answer some of the questions you might have, and I'll describe those in more detail once we get toward the end. At this time, I want to welcome Cindy O'Neill to come up and say a few opening remarks.
I'd like to thank y'all for coming out. My name is Cindy O'Neill. I worked for DOTD for 30 years as the State National Flood Insurance Program Coordinator. Retired for 9 months. It wasn't what it was cracked up to be, so now I'm back at work. Was enjoying what I'm doing, trying to help the parish get back into the community rating system so we can save some money on our flood insurance premiums. And we're hoping you guys tonight can help us with some ideas on the master plan so we can figure out where we're having some drainage problems and maybe help get them fixed or find a solution to them. So please feel free to ask anybody any question you might have. They're here to help. So thank you for coming.
Thank you, Cindy. Parish is in very good hands with Cindy when it comes to floodplain management, that's for sure. So you guys got really lucky there. So here's our agenda of what we're going to talk about in the presentation itself. We're going to talk about the basin itself. I know lots of us focus on our neighborhoods, and we want to make sure that you guys know what we're doing is more of a regional scale plan. Talk about the commission itself. What the heck is a master plan? What does that mean? And it's not like a little cartoon guy doing something devious. Talk about the process, where we are, what are we going through, and then we'll go into some of those steps in detail, and then kind of wrap it up at the end with our schedule and some key takeaways for you guys. So looking at things in general at first, let's talk about this watershed, right? So this watershed is very big. It's really, really large. 7 parishes are impacted with 15% of the state's population. That's a lot of people influenced and affected by what goes on in the Amite River Basin. The major streams are listed here, and you can see it starts down at Lake Marpaw and goes all the way up into Mississippi. So the ARBC is responsible for looking at this entire jurisdiction, this whole area. So looking at some of the things that have happened in this area, you can see on the left, it's a little slow to get started, but that's an animation of the August 2016 event in the basin. It takes a few minutes to run, but you'll see in just a second, that's a whole lot of blue on the screen right there. And, you know, I was affected. A lot of you in this room were probably affected by that event. So it's a major, major event, and we've got some really good data and models on it. And you could see the water come up, and then obviously in the headwaters start running down. And then in the southern part of that basin, we're down in the southern part, you know, takes a lot longer for that water to evacuate. On the right side, you can see what we call LIDAR data or topography data. LIDAR is an acronym for light detection and ranging, if you didn't know what that was. And it's basically some sensors that are mounted to planes that can basically shoot laser beams, not kidding, from a plane to the ground and time it to back. So we can map the elevation of the ground within like a half an inch or less accuracy. We can map your doghouse behind your house. I'm not kidding. It's very good elevation data. And we need this data to be able to map where the water is going to go in the watershed and how quickly it's going to get there. And that color range, the white is higher elevation, and the light green is a very low elevation. So you can kind of see it's really flat in the bottom part of the watershed, and we actually have a few hills in the northern part of the watershed. And so we need to look at those kind of, we call them geomorphological features, to see where the water is going to move in the watershed. Sam, so some of these pictures Sam took when they were out in the boat driving around, so I'll let him chime in if he wants to chime in and say something. But basically, we wanted to talk about the basin is very important to a lot of people. It's important to everyone in this room because you're here, but culturally it's very important. I grew up going to sandbars on the weekends, fishing, running trot lines, all kinds of stuff on this river, going to sandbars. Recreational as well as some industrial on this river. It's very beautiful and very important to a lot of people. It also can be very catastrophic, right? We need to understand the river, understand, I don't like to use the word manage, but how to live with the river and its water, and how to do it in a safe and productive way. So let's talk about the ARBC Commission. If you're not familiar with the Commission and what the duties of the Commission, what their goals are. So number one is to mitigate flood damage. Us in the floodplain management industry, we use that term mitigate a lot. And basically that means we want to reduce the damage. We want to try to remove it, get rid of it, right? You divert your kid away from the stove, you're mitigating that damage. It's kind of the same thing with floodplain management. This is a regional commission, right? We're looking at regional river management. So we're not looking at something that your public works department might look at in terms of undersized culverts and things. We want to know about those things. We want to collaborate with those departments, but we're looking much larger. Looking at responsible watershed management. We're looking at getting the community officials in this room working together. Water doesn't stop at the city line or the parish boundary. We're looking at getting everyone to work and collaborate together. And also looking at trying to practice some conservation. We just saw some real pretty pictures of the river. It is one of the most beautiful rivers in the state, in my opinion. Looking at conserving that as a natural resource for generations to come as well. So let's talk about a master plan in general, right? So we just kind of touched on what the ARBC, what the goals of the ARBC are, but now let's talk about what do we mean when we say master plan. Like I said, I always think of some like little devious person. But basically it's a big long-term strategy where you can look at future development. And we want to guide that development into the future in a really safe and productive way so that we're not harming others when we do something in this part of the watershed. We don't want to push water onto someone else. It'll have implementation governance, who's responsible for what, who's responsible for maintenance, who's responsible for following up, and also it's on a 5-year cycle. This picture is a picture of the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, that state agency's master plan, and you see the website at the bottom of the screen there. That's a common 5-year master plan that you guys might be familiar with, that has projects and it has different things that they're trying to address in that master plan. So we just kind of wanted to show you this master plan will focus on the Amite River Basin, but it's going to be a similar process to what CPRA has done for their master plan as well. So how will their plan align with the mission, right? So number one, we want to look at identifying areas of flood risk and areas of concern. That's one of the reasons we're here tonight, and we've got a station set up here. We'll have Peyton, a person manning the station. You can come and look at this GIS website tonight, or pick up a card, take it home, enter a point, enter comments, give us your feedback. Tell us you love us, hate us, whatever. We'll take it, put it on the website. Also, you can walk over here and speak to Darby or Mario, put a sticker on the map if you like low tech. We cover all of it. And look at the basin and tell us what some of your areas of concern are. Where is it repeatedly flooding? Where have you been frustrated trying to get something accomplished or done? Something like that. We want to know what you think. So that's one of the things. And then obviously all that data is going to be fed into the master plan when we start looking at projects to try to reduce the flooding and solve some of those issues. We also want to look at some conservation areas. I mentioned conservation earlier. Governance and funding, which we'll talk about that in a little bit later, because once we identify projects to solve the issues, obviously we've got to come up with the money to get the project in place and put it on the ground to make a difference. And then maintenance, right? If you put in all the projects in the world, but no one maintains it or takes care of it over time, we're just going to be right back where we are. We're going to have more problems. So maintenance is going to be a big part of the plan as well. So our process has a lot of steps. It's a lot of zigzaggy process, but you can see we're right here. We're at the beginning of the process. So we're not the kind of group that has public meetings and you come in the door and we're like, well, this is really done. We're just kind of telling you about it. We really want your input into the process. So we're here early in the process to get your input into it, and then we're going to go through and look at all these different areas, and some of these I'm going to talk about in more detail. All right, so first off, I'm going to hand it to Sam to talk about data collection.
Right, thanks, Jerry. So with the master plan, one of the key things was not to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of data out there already. The Louisiana Watershed Initiative, which many of you may be familiar with, has already developed very detailed models for the whole state now. And so we've been working on that project as well, and so we have this data, and we've gone around, done the research. We find any data that we can so that we don't have to spend money collecting it. However, there was definitely some gaps, and so we've been doing some studies to take that further. So one of the examples here is sediment. There's obviously a lot of talk with the river about the sedimentation problems and the need for dredging there. So we've been out there in the field, we've been collecting sediment samples so that we can quantify how much sediment's in the river and the rates of sedimentation so that we can develop maintenance plans for that. We've also collected some new surveying places to see how the river's changed since it was last surveyed in detail back in 2017. And this just helps us understand the processes that go on in the river and how it changes with time, because it's very much a dynamic system. So just some examples here. What we're actually doing here is we're actually walking along the bed of the river here, along the diversion canal, and we're coming up to the weir here. You can see some of the scour holes and that on the bottom of the river. And this is where we've sent some neat technology out there on boats to essentially scan the whole of the riverbed. And even in some places we found cars, we found sunken boats. It's amazing some of the detail we see, but this really lets us understand what's happening below the water where we can't see it, and how that impacts flooding, both on high flows and low flow conditions. So another thing we've been looking at is codes and ordinances. There's a number of codes and ordinances that regulate how development's done. For example, how high you have to elevate a structure when you're building to keep it safe from flooding. Other things are detention, how much water needs to be detained when you're developing a project. And so we've looked at that across the whole basin, every parish within the basin, and it's very evident there's a lot of differences in the local ordinances and policies. So one thing that we want to get out this plan is to actually make recommendations on some ordinance changes. So I believe there's now a state requirement for elevating 1 foot above the FEMA flood elevation, and so there may be opportunities to do higher than that, recommendations on where it may be needed. And when it comes to detaining runoff for new developments, how much you detain and how long for, we're going to look at making recommendations here that really balance the need to allow development but without causing adverse impacts. And another thing that is part of the plan is the community rating system. And so this is a FEMA program that rewards the residents of parishes with discounts on insurance based on proactive measures to reduce flood risk. This program works all the way from a class 10, which is 0 discount, down to a 1, which I believe is 45% discount. It's very challenging to get down to them low numbers. But Livingston Parish has hired Cindy O'Neill here, who is tasked with getting the parish back into the program so that those discounts can be passed on to the residents who pay flood insurance. And so we're also looking at how the master plan can help all the communities within the basin with their community rating system. And so, for example, just having a floodplain plan, which the master plan is going to cover floodplain management, having a plan can get you points to get to that class reduced and get more insurance discounts. Another big item there is green space preservation, like floodplain preservation, so you're preventing the floodplain from being developed. There's a lot of points in there. So we're going to look at how the master plan aligns with the community rating system, and we're going to be giving recommendations to every community within the basin on how the master plan can help them apply and get more credit there and potentially lower the class, as well as just helping maintain it. There can be a lot of work and paperwork to maintain that class. So I believe a lot of what we're doing here is really going to be a lot of help to communities to keep them classifications there. So a key thing with a master plan is understanding the existing conditions, understanding the existing flood risk, understanding the existing sediment state in the river, and environmental as well. And so one of the first things we're looking at is the flooding mechanisms. So there's many different ways an area can flood. So some of these conditions is wind-driven flooding. A couple of months ago, we see it where the river was up 3 or 4 feet just because you had about 25 knot wind coming in from the southeast for several days, and that pushed a lot of water from the lake up into the river basin, and the waterways were closed. And as we've seen in hurricanes, the hurricanes can push the lakes up into the basin and cause flooding. And some other ways of flooding is just flash flooding. This is where we get that short, really intense burst of rainfall, just falls, and the local storm sewer system can't handle it, but it's not necessarily widespread flooding. And then rainfall, just as we see in 2001, in May 2001, we had some very, very intense rainfall, caused localized flooding. However, the Amite River never really got to a high flood stage. And then we had them situations like 2016, where we had a lot of rainfall that was really centered over the town of Watson, and that just fell really, really intensely, and that water come down, it spilled over Range Avenue, traveled all the way to Walker, and same on the west side, backed up through Bayou Manchek and some other bayous there, and caused extensive flooding. So there's a lot of different ways that just depending on where the rain falls, how intense it is, how long it rains for, these can really impact. And we need to have a look at all of these methods, because there's many different ways that we can get flooded here. So just some of the key man-made features. We've got the Amite River Diversion Canal is under construction now. And so that, it sounds like probably some of the permitting is going to be approved the end of this year, which will allow some of the construction contracts to be put out there from what we understand. And so hopefully in a couple of years that could be complete. So the benefits there are going to mainly be in EBR, but you're going to definitely see some benefits in Livingston Parish. And then there's just some key features that really impact things, like the Amite River Diversion Canal. That does take a lot of the water out from flowing down through Port Vincent and sort of shortcuts to the lake there. And then you've got other natural features, like Range Avenue is essentially a ridge line. And once the water gets up to that ridge line and spills to the east, it causes extensive flooding. All the while that keeps below that ridge line, the flooding isn't too bad in Livingston, other than immediately adjacent to the river. There's lots of both man-made and natural features that really impact the flooding. So how we do this is with modelling. So we use computer models that look at all the elevations and then look at the rainfall. And as you can see here, this is a simulation on Bayou Manchek. I think that's Wards Creek coming in there. And so you can see how we build these models to predict what happens. We compare it to observed floods to make sure it's reasonable. And we can run this for the existing conditions, but we can also do proposed conditions. So if we was looking at a new culvert, a new reservoir, we can put all of them projects into these models, and you're going to see what impact that has on the flooding. And so we use that to evaluate both existing, and then that's what we use for the project selection to ensure, one of the key things is ensuring that we don't hurt your neighbour. It seems easy to just do a project to stop flooding, but the reality is you can't make that water disappear. And so if you're moving the water from your property, you're essentially going to move it somewhere else. And so these models allow us to evaluate projects and make sure, one, that they're effective at reducing flooding, but two, make sure that we're not just pushing it downstream to the next community.
But one of the key things on here is the damage calculations. So once we start doing those with and without project comparisons, we not only can look at the flood elevations and the amount of water, but also looking at things like assessor data, agricultural data. How many dollars in losses are we going to experience with the flood versus the flood with this project in place? So how much money is that going to save? How many lives is that going to save? How many fewer roads are going to get inundated? So that's like translating all of this technical modeling stuff that these guys do into good decision-making format for all of the leadership to take a look at.
Yeah, here's just a couple other examples here. This you can see the Spanish Lake area.
Yeah, the one on the left is supposed to run first. Twice.
And on the right here, you can see the water. This is the water going up against the Marvin Bro levee system in 2016, and then all of a sudden it starts overtopping, and Ascension really gets the flood in there. But you can really see how the levee system there impacted the flow of the water. Whether it's an existing levee or one that's proposed, we can just put that into the models, we can run the numbers, and we can see what impact that's going to have. As Jerry mentioned, not just in terms of flood elevations, but in terms of economics, like how many structures will be protected and what were the expected economic benefits.
And these little lines that are coming on the end are particle tracers, and the long line is a very fast, short line's very slow. So now we know how fast the water's going. As you guys all know, fast water is more damaging than slow water. So now we can incorporate that.
Right. And then identification and mitigation actions. So the key thing, we want to improve things. We want to reduce the flooding. We want to make sure it doesn't impact your neighbour. And so we do. There's a lot of projects that are ongoing at the moment, as well as projects that are in the process of being funded, as well as projects that are still in concept. And so we're looking at all of these, we're looking at new projects, and the idea is we're going to roll up a plan that uses the best combination, and it may mean that we can't just do one project without another. We may need to do one project that reduces the flooding here, but we may have to do another project to stop that being moved somewhere else. And so we're going to look at that, and we're going to come up with the best way that we can, the best combination of projects to do no harm and ensure the most benefits. Oh, did you want to take this one, Jerry?
Sure. That one. So we often look at types of mitigation projects into two big categories. And if you've looked at the CPRA master plan, they do it as well, but they may define them a little bit differently. So structural and non-structural. So a structural solution is a project with a shovel, dirt in the ground, right? Like, so we're building something, we're putting something in the ground. It is a structure. It could be, I mentioned culverts earlier, large systems like the system around New Orleans. I'm not suggesting that is a plan here, but that's just an example of a structural solution. A non-structural solution are actions like floodplain management, looking at CRS, looking at insurance, looking at where people are located, good floodplain management activities, right? Elevating on a structure like stilts or piers versus fill, things of that nature. Here's how you can help. Again, visiting our stations, communicating to us what is your priority, letting your concerns know, and give us your input. We really genuinely want it. And our website that we have will be online beyond today. So we have cards that we can give you to pass the link around to your colleagues, friends, share on social media, what have you. We would like to collect as many comments and input into this as possible. What would you like to see? What are the areas that are really causing you some problems? So once we start looking at the projects, how are we going to fund those types of projects, right? That's like literally the $64,000 question. How are we going to fund these projects? There's a lots of different strategies. Obviously, there are a lot of grant opportunities, and Cindy with the parish is very well versed in all of the different types from FEMA and different agencies. We have some other groups. There's USDA grants. So we'll be bringing all of those to bear, especially as different types of projects qualify for different types of grants. But grants isn't the only solution, right? We can't 100% fund everything with grants. Sam mentioned Louisiana Watershed Initiative earlier. You guys have probably heard about that. And there are lots of funds through that program that are hitting the street now. But it could be something like a fair taxation structure where the people that are benefiting from the project are the ones who are funding the project. Right now, everything is just a conversation. And so, again, we really want your input on what you think and where we may go with this. But again, we will need to identify some funding for the projects once we decide what those are. And so maintenance, I mentioned maintenance earlier is a very key part, but it also needs to look at things like the timing and the need, how much maintenance is needed, what is that level, who's responsible. You know, I worked on the map updates in New Orleans post-Katrina, and that was a big conversation about the levee system upgrades and who was going to maintain the $1.2 billion upgrades that the Corps did. You know, like, it was a long conversation. You know, nobody was raising their hand. And it is the state now, in case you don't know. But it was a lot of conversations about the responsible party and also the funding to support that maintenance, right? So that's got to be identified as well. It's a very key part of having a good system in place for flood risk reduction and floodplain management. Looking at the types of maintenance we're talking about, clogged waterways, you all know, after, you know, Ida, I won't say publicly what I call that storm. The debris and everything that was down on the ground was one of the worst wind events we ever had here. You know, things like that, clearing all those types of things out so that the rivers can do their job and convey water out of the river. It's just some of the examples. So let's talk about our schedule. I showed you that big long diagram and that we're in the beginning of the process here. But according to the legislature, right, so they sort of mandated the schedule on this thing that we are working feverishly to follow. The end of this year, we are legally mandated to have the plan presented to the ARBC board, and then it will be released publicly early next year. So we'll be back having another series of meetings when this plan is completed to roll it out to everyone. And hopefully we get a thumbs up, but we'll see. So what are some of the benefits of this master plan? Obviously, number one is do no harm with a regional approach, right? That is the number one thing. And as Sam mentioned, we've got to look at a combination of projects, right? There isn't one magic bullet that's going to fix the flooding issues that we have in this basin. And so it could be a combination of this project working in hand with this project together. Those two projects do what we need to do in that portion of the basin. So you can see the benefits here. So what is the bottom line? I always like to just give people bottom line. We threw a lot of information at you about things. So basically just know that this master plan is regionally focused. The primary goal is to look at reducing the flood risk and do no harm. Obviously we have to align with the Amite River Basin Commission goals and bring our communities together for safer, more resilient communities. I work a lot in resilience studies and recovery, and studies show that smaller rural communities are often a lot more resilient than much larger ones because they work together and come together. And that's what we really hope this plan will accomplish. We really want to benefit those that are most vulnerable within the watershed and conserve natural resources. I think now we'll take a couple of questions before we start the open house portion of the open house. Yes, sir.
A couple years ago,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sam actually was the project manager that led the modeling of that model that they used on the website, and that came from the Louisiana Watershed Initiative modeling data, and we are updating that and using it. Yeah.
they did a bunch of their own.
Yes.
Yeah. We had several hundred high water marks. I think we had like about 600 or so. We did a very thorough quality review on them, and we threw out about 30%, which is actually a small number. There's a lot worse, but some extra data. So that was all used to make sure the models gave the same results, and that's what we shared with the Amite River Basin Commission. They did then they put it on the website. But we still have that surface in there. We've got the models of August 2016, and we've ran projects to see what would have been if the project was built.
The water surface elevation grid from 2016 is actually on this website, not the depth grid, but the water surface elevation grid is there. So you can still take a look at it on this website. But are you speaking to the benefit cost ratio analysis or? Thank you, Gary, member of the commission. Yes, ma'am.
So the model has been updated in the last few years. We've added a lot more detail to it. We've added updated land use. And so I think the date on that would have been probably through like 22 would be the land use that we had at the time. And so there is some, so that like the development and that makes a difference on the smaller floods, but when you get the major floods, there's less of an impact because essentially what happens, the soil is so saturated, it doesn't matter that whether it's a parking lot or woodland. Once that soil gets really drenched, then everything runs off. So it's usually on the smaller storms that you do notice the bigger impacts, and that sort of fizzles out as you get into the bigger storms. But we have updated it. We've updated with some of the projects that have been built since then, and we've got a lot more detailed data as well.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. So that's been updated, and we'll be using that as the base model for these project alternative assessments.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Well, there is one in Ascension next week. Okay. Well, we sent out press releases and social media and emails, and so we did our best on advertising, I will say. Yes, ma'am, I hear it. Thank you for letting us know that. I agree. And we're going to do our best to mitigate the situation with the storm and get the word out. We have another meeting tomorrow night that's canceled, and so I take your comment to heart, and we'll do our best. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. But to answer your question, that we do plan on having one more round of public meetings later in the process. But I do feel like because of tonight, we might do something to mitigate with the storm going on and everything, to sort of maybe have another meeting. It may be virtual, but we'll figure it out. I don't know what we're going to do yet. Yes, ma'am. Agree. Which is why we wanted to have a website up instead of just show up and look at a map, so, feel free to distribute that link to as many people as you know. We're happy to do that. Thank you. Any other questions, comments, or concerns? We'll take all of it. Okay, so now I invite you, if you would like to come and talk to one of our team members, again, look for somebody with a name tag, and visit our stations. We've got one over there, just general information about what is the master plan in general, the process, the steps. We also have a board about CRS, which we've talked about several times tonight, kind of enveloped within the NFIP and the flood insurance program. And then this station is looking at the different types of flooding that we experience. Sam mentioned that. And because there are different types of flooding, we have to look at different types of projects to address. There's not one magic project that can fix all the different types of flooding that we have and how we would go about doing that. And then over here, we have, again, our low-tech solution and high-tech solution with our GIS site. We'll have Peyton sitting at the table to assist you in adding a point or drawing an area, and it'll prompt you with some drop-down menus to fill in. Or we have cards that you can take. You don't have to stay. You can take them home, do it at home at your leisure, to look at the areas in the watershed. Okay? If there's no other questions, we'll adjourn for the open house portion. We'll be here until 8 o'clock, so feel free to stay and conversate as long as you'd like, or be free to go. Thank you again for coming, and everybody stay safe for the storm.